The strange but true story featured on this podcast contains details some people may find unsettling. Listener discretion is advised. I'm Chyaz Samuel, and things are about to get weird. Howdy everyone. Oh, I don't know where that came from. Welcome back to episode 58 of Things Are About to Get Weird. Well, we had a very heavy past couple of episodes with the Isdal woman case, didn't we? I knew that today I wanted to take a break from stories that are more tragic in nature and true crime heavy, and instead get a little spooky. I mean, some would say that talking about one of the world's most haunted hotels isn't exactly light-hearted and wholesome, but nonetheless, this episode will hopefully be fascinating in a totally different way to our last few. So, several days ago, I was on Instagram and I saw one of those posts where it displays a long list of different films and says if you had to pick only 3, which would you choose? These were all horror movies, and without a second thought, I opted for The Silence of the Lambs, Shaun of the Dead, and of course, The Shining. And that final choice must have triggered something in my brain because it really put the film on my mind. And when it came to deciding on the topic of today's episode, I knew I wanted to do a deep dive into the history, and more importantly, the hauntings of the location that inspired Stephen King to write the Shining novel, which was published back in 1977. So join me as we head to the US state of Colorado to explore the strange world of the infamous Stanley Hotel. I'm going to kick things off with a bit of trivia because there's a common misconception that the Stanley Hotel, located in Estes Park, Colorado, was the setting for the 1980s movie adaptation of The Shining book. But this isn't true. The Stanley Kubrick film was actually shot largely in the UK, on purpose-built sets at Elstree Studios, that were inspired by various real-life locations. For example, one of the key reference points for the interiors of the Overlook Hotel, which is the name of the fictional establishment from The Shining, was actually the Ahwahnee Hotel in Yosemite National Park, which is somewhere I visited just last month. Although, unbelievably, I didn't see the hotel itself. I didn't actually put 2 and 2 together whilst we were there, which I'm kicking myself about. But I definitely plan on exploring this next time I go to Yosemite. The 1997 The Shining TV miniseries that Stephen King was a lot more involved with was actually shot at the Stanley Hotel. That's a whole different story involving creative differences and Hollywood politics, but anyway, the point is that the Stanley Hotel has very little to do with the Shining movie, but everything to do with Stephen King's original book, which I am also a huge fan of. Now, if you're not familiar with the plot or premise of The Shining, here is a heavily abridged recap of it just to provide you with a little extra context as we head into this story. A man named Jack Torrance, who is a writer with a troubled past, decides to accept a temporary job as a caretaker for the grand and imposing Overlook Hotel, which in the book is located in Colorado's Rocky Mountains. This role would mean that he and his family would spend the freezing winter months at the Overlook, making sure that everything was maintained whilst the hotel was closed to guests, which was a necessity due to the terrible weather conditions the area experiences. Jack plans to use the solitude of the family's time at the Overlook to work on a play he'd been writing, but when the snowy weather takes a drastic turn for the worse and essentially traps himself, his wife, and their young son in the hotel, things become very strange indeed. There have already been hints that there are some paranormal or supernatural forces present within the building, and we also see Jack's son Danny display evidence that he has some psychic abilities which we come to know as The Shining. In a nutshell, as the book progresses, we see that Jack is pulled under the spell of the forces within the hotel, and culminates in him becoming possessed to reenact a tragedy that had taken place at the Overlook years earlier. year, when a former caretaker named Delbert Grady murdered his own family. Just in case there's anyone who hasn't read the book or seen the film, I won't spoil the ending, but it's safe to say that it's a tale full of bizarre, otherworldly encounters that definitely end up sticking with you as a reader. And it was a visit to the Stanley Hotel made by Stephen King and his wife Tabitha in 1974 that stuck with him enough that it actually kickstarted his imagination when it came to penning one of his most successful novels. When Stephen and Tabitha checked into the Stanley Hotel, the building was on the brink of closing down for the winter, and they soon discovered that they were, in fact, the only guests booked in that night. It's something that he's spoken about a number of times, so, in his own words, quote, "In late September of 1974, Tabby and I spent a night at the grand old hotel in Estes Park, the Stanley. We were the only guests, as it turned out. The following day, they were going to close the place down for the winter. Wandering through its corridors, I thought that it seemed the perfect, maybe the archetypical, setting for a ghost story. That night, I dreamed of my 3-year-old son running through the corridors, looking back over his shoulder, eyes wide, screaming. He was being chased by a fire hose. I woke up with a tremendous jerk, sweating all over, within an inch of falling out of bed. I got up, lit a cigarette, sat in the chair looking out the window at the Rockies, and by the time the cigarette was done, I had the bones of the book firmly set in my mind." Honestly, what an amazing insight. I loved finding this quote. And it's with the King's stay at the Stanley Hotel that we arrive at our first ghost story connected with the legendary venue, with the connection even extending to the exact room Stephen King stayed in, room 217. When the hotel was first built in 1909, its owner and architect, Freeland Oscar Stanley, decided that he wanted it to be run fully on electricity, which was quite unusual at the time. And whilst he did achieve this and it was successful for the first couple of years, during a flood in the local area in 1911, the hotel experienced a power cut, and Freeland realised they needed a backup plan. So he set about installing gas lanterns in each room, not knowing that this action would almost immediately result in disaster. The head chambermaid at the time, a lady named Elizabeth Wilson, started to make her rounds the day after the gas lanterns had been put in place. So this was the 25th of June 1911. As the story goes, Elizabeth walked into room 217 with a lit candle, with no way of knowing that there had been a major issue with the gas pipes leading to that part of the hotel. There had been a leak which had caused a huge buildup of gas in the room, and the presence of Elizabeth's candle meant that an explosion was inevitable. Now this story isn't going quite where you think it is, because by some miracle, Elizabeth didn't actually lose her life in the accident, even though there was a blast that caused considerable damage to that area of the hotel. She actually survived. Although the exact details of her ordeal have often been debated and questioned, the tale that's most commonly told is that Elizabeth was launched by the force of the blast as she stood in the second floor room's doorway, and actually somehow landed on the floor below, breaking both of her ankles and falling into a coma in the process. I'm happy to say that despite it taking a considerable amount of time, Elizabeth made an excellent recovery, and she actually returned to work at the Stanley Hotel in 1913. I'm not sure I could have done the same. The whole event must have been incredibly traumatizing for her. But Elizabeth actually ended up remaining employed at the hotel until 1950. And if the reports are to be believed, it seems that she felt so at home at the Stanley that, after she passed away, her spirit is thought to have taken up permanent residence in the very room that was the site of her accident. For the second week running on the podcast, it seems that we could have a helpful ghost on our hands. Just like the spirit that's thought to inhabit Manchester's Peveril of the Peak pub, The ghost, that many believe to be Elizabeth Wilson, is said to still be engaging in some of the duties she performed at work while she was alive. Over the years, guests staying in room 217 have reported waking up in the morning to find that their belongings are arranged in a much tidier fashion than they'd been the night before, with some citing that their clothing had been folded or even their suitcase reorganized whilst they were sleeping. I must say that the thought of a friendly spirit coming in the middle of the night and tidying up sounds lovely, but for some guests, things have apparently gone a little further than that. One report stated that a couple once told staff at the hotel that whilst they were trying to sleep, the sheets started moving around them, as though someone was trying to make the bed whilst they still lay in it. Some sources attribute this particular story to a different room in the hotel, room 407, which is also thought to be home to a benevolent spirit. But regardless, I can imagine that some would find this very disconcerting. Going back to room 217 though, it's been suggested that Elizabeth's spirit doesn't always take quite as kindly to unmarried couples occupying the room. As old-fashioned as it sounds, multiple pairs who have stayed in the room without having previously tied the knot have described feeling a cold, somewhat chilling presence in the bed with them, as though some unseen force is between them trying to keep them apart. Now, I found these accounts particularly interesting because, as you'll know if you've listened to episode 10 of the podcast, where I talk about my own paranormal experiences, one of them happened to both my husband and I whilst we were staying at a bed and breakfast. And when you have a shared spooky encounter and you have someone to corroborate your experience, if you like, it does make it more compelling. I've definitely noticed that in real life, when people ask me to recount my personal ghost tales, during both of my own stories, I can see a shift when I talk about the corroboration aspects of them. People absolutely tend to become more intrigued and lean in a bit more and perhaps start questioning their skepticism when I get to those parts of my experiences. So this is definitely a fascinating aspect of this apparent Stanley Hotel haunting for me. But not all of the ghosts allegedly residing at the establishment have quite the same harmless reputation. In an episode of the TV series Ghost Hunters, the crew actually visit the Stanley Hotel and are immediately greeted by concierge Billy Ward. Billy begins to walk the three presenters through various parts of the hotel, and he describes several paranormal happenings as he goes. The one that struck me was a first-hand account of an experience he had when he just started working at the Stanley. Standing at the front desk, Billy described how, during his first week on the job, he was working very late and learning how to do the night audit. He said that he was standing behind the desk, and all of a sudden, books started violently flying off a nearby shelf. You can tell that the hosts are amazed that he stayed on in the job after this happened, but Billy didn't seem too fazed by the recollection. It made me wonder whether he'd already heard about the hotel's haunted reputation before he turned up for work, and had anticipated that he might have some brushes with the supernatural himself there. As the group continue to make their way around, they end up in a lift heading up to the infamous 4th floor. And Billy very nonchalantly explains that this is believed to be one of the most active areas in the hotel in terms of paranormal incidents, and that, quote, the ghost children like to play up here, which is probably quite an alarming thing to hear if you're in a lift up to that very location. Billy added that there's a theory that the spirits belong to the son and daughter of a maid who once worked at the hotel, and who used to spend time running and playing along the 4th floor corridors in life. He explained that when working nights, he'd frequently get calls from guests staying on the 3rd floor, complaining that they could hear children stomping around from the ceiling above, but there was never anyone there. Oof. Now, as they arrive at the floor, Billy claims that Stephen King himself actually saw the spirits of the ghost children during his stay, but I haven't been able to confirm this from any other source. As far as I can tell, King himself has never actually described seeing a ghost at the Stanley. The only spooky element of his stay that I know of for sure was the dream he had about his son running through the corridors, so I wonder if there were some crossed wires for Billy there perhaps. Nevertheless, it feels like there could be a link here with two of the young characters mentioned a few times in the Shining book, who turn out to be the daughters of the former caretaker Delbert Grady, who, by the way, was apparently named after a real bartender Stephen King met at the Stanley Hotel, who had the surname Grady. On that note, here's one more piece of trivia for you. The terrifying twin girls who appear in the film, arguably two of the most iconic horror film characters of all time, are very different to Grady's daughters as described in the book. For one, they're actually sisters in the novel rather than twins, and it's only really implied that their ghosts or spirits are present in the hotel. The scenes that they appear in the film were very much created for the big screen adaptation. But regardless, I still feel like Stephen King could have gathered some kind of inspiration from these alleged fourth floor spirits. Let's talk about a couple of the other rooms in the hotel that are notorious for reports of ghostly activity, both of which are located on the fourth floor. Room 401 is said to have an eerie feel to it, and many believe it's home to the spirit of a man with a connection to the land the hotel now stands on. I found a fascinating travel account on the website The Discoverer from a writer called Michael Nordine who actually stayed overnight in the room. He said that he was handed a piece of paper alongside his room key, giving him somewhat of a heads up about the reported paranormal activity in room 401. Here's what it said. I found this so interesting because it's right from the source. Quote, "A male ghost, who some believe to be Lord Dunraven, is reported to be in this room. Although he never visited the hotel in his life, as it was built 20 years after he left Estes Park, it was built on land he once owned. In the closet, women feel their hair being played with, an arm around their shoulder or waist, or a hand moving up the back of their leg. Men don't feel particularly welcome in this room sometimes, as they have felt someone is pressing them into bed or their jewelry disappearing. This was the room where Jason of the Ghost Hunters television show had his drinking glass, which was on the nightstand, implode while he was sleeping. The closet door also opened and closed on its own." Well, what can you say? Some hotels give you leaflets about local attractions, and others warn you about highly inappropriate ghostly roommates, so there we go. Along the same floor, room 428 has a fascinating reputation all of its own. This is the spot thought to be haunted by the spirit of a cowboy. Guests have spoken about either waking up to find this figure standing over them, or spotting it lurking in the corner of the room. Oh, I don't know which of those sounds worse. It's said to be more active when female guests are staying in the space, with some reports even saying that the cowboy tries to give them a ghostly kiss, which is doubly horrifying. Whilst it's impossible to confirm this, many believe that this spirit may be that of Jim Nugent, also known as Rocky Mountain Jim, who held the role of visitor guide within Estes Park during the 1860s and 1870s. It's suspected that he was murdered by fellow guide Griffith Evans in 1874, although the exact perpetrator was never convicted, and it's thought that his ghost settled at the Stanley, perhaps restless from the lack of closure in the case of his killing. It's also said that despite there being no hotel rooms directly above room 428, it's common for those staying there to hear footsteps and even the sounds of furniture being moved around over their heads when there's definitely no one up there. Room 412 is yet another spot on this floor that has had its fair share of odd tales attached to it. it. In the Ghost Hunters episode, the staff at the Stanley recalled an incident where a woman that had been staying in the room woke up screaming, calling for help so loudly that it woke up many of the other guests. When 2 female staff members reached her, she was rolling around on the bed and then on the floor, saying that there was an energy within the hotel and that it was trying to take her over. Together they lifted the guest up and tried to carry her down the hallway away from the room that was causing her so much distress. But then, as they described on the show, it was as though the woman was possessed by an incredible strength and flung both of the staff members off her so violently and with such force that they were thrown against either corridor wall. Concierge Billy Ward then recalled that after the woman was taken by paramedics to a local hospital, it was found that she had no drugs or alcohol in her system, nothing that could have explained this outburst away. She truly believed in that moment that an unseen force was trying to possess her body. Absolutely terrifying for everyone involved, I'm sure. But the bedrooms are far from the only reportedly haunted areas of the Stanley Hotel, as there is, quite literally, a lot more to the property than first meets the eye. One such hotspot is the concert hall, which was built in 1910 by F.O. Stanley as a gift to his wife Flora. But whilst the gesture was meant to give Flora a space in which to perform as a pianist, it's believed that she played the instrument on the stage only once, and during the performance her stage fright was so paralysing that she vowed to never play publicly again. However, after Flora passed away, guests would sometimes mention that they had heard the sound of piano music drifting from the concert room when it had been entirely unoccupied, prompting some to question whether Flora's spirit had found some peace in performing from beyond the grave. Staff have also got used to guests remarking that they can smell wafts of a rose-scented perfume around the concert hall, a scent that Flora Stanley always wore. As far as the Stanley ghost tales go, I think this is one of the more wholesome, and probably one that I would love to encounter myself if I ever get the chance to visit the hotel. It's an area that's considered to be incredibly active, paranormally speaking, with frequent sightings of orbs as well as lights dimming and doors slamming seemingly of their own accord. The latter 2 events are often attributed to 2 suspected Stanley spirits. One, a man named Eddie who used to work as a lighting technician in the hall, and the second, a man named Paul, another former employee who passed away in 2005. Now, whilst all of these spooky happenings take place above the ground, the same can't be said for the final 2 areas I'm going to mention today. One of them is particularly chilling to me, so before we get to that, let's keep things more upbeat for a moment. Well, as upbeat as you can get when discussing ghosts of the departed. In the grounds of the hotel, there's a pet cemetery, which doesn't sound like the source of a positive story, but hear me out. Also, I promise I'm not trying to sneak in various other Stephen King novel titles along the way, like little Easter eggs. There is genuinely a pet cemetery at the Stanley. It's said that the pets of the hotel's former owners are buried there, including a sweet-natured golden retriever named Cassie. I've personally never met a golden retriever who is anything other than a total angel, and if the stories are to be believed, Cassie is no exception, even in spirit form. Cassie's ghostly silhouette has not only been spotted around the grounds on a number of occasions, but guests often describe hearing the familiar scratching of a dog's claws at their hotel room door, only for there to be nothing there when they investigate. By all accounts, Cassie was a very friendly dog in life, and this scratching never sounds threatening. It's very much a "go on, please let me into play" kind of pouring on the door. There have also been times when newspapers have shown up on guest doorsteps when they didn't request them and hadn't been delivered by staff, and many like to think that this is Cassie's way of being helpful, which is beyond adorable. And now that I've lulled you into a false sense of security with that very cute section of this tale, we're going to get a lot creepier very quickly, because what could be more unnerving when we're discussing an incredibly haunted, old hotel in the Rockies than an underground network of caves and tunnels running directly underneath it. Dark, cold spaces full of shadows where mysterious breezes are said to send chills through those walking down there, and where the ghost of a cat is said to be a permanent fixture. The reason for the existence of this underground system is largely due to the time in which the hotel was built. It was expected that hotel staff should only be seen when necessary, so the employees would use the tunnels to move between different areas of the grand estate. As the routes became less and less frequently used over time, a couple of the smaller tunnel spaces are said to have collapsed and are now closed off. But there's still one cave that I believe is still part of one of the tours that guests and visitors can book tickets for, or at least it was a few years ago. Apparently, one of the ghosts that has been most frequently sighted down in the tunnel is that of a former pastry chef who worked at the hotel, and even when the spirit itself hasn't been visible, visitors have claimed to smell a sudden, overwhelming scent of baked goods down there, which, to be fair, must have made the experience more pleasant. But I'm still not entirely sure that even that could convince me to venture down into the caves. I'm someone who is quite content to stick with searching for spirits above the ground. Now, interestingly, a fact I stumbled across whilst watching the Ghost Hunters episode was that the ground below the hotel, i.e. where the caves are, is made up of a number of natural materials, one of which is quartz. And if you're into your spirituality, you'll know that many believe that quartz is a stone thought to be able to hold on to energy. So the line of thinking is that if there are spirits down in the caves, it could be that their energy is trapped within the quartz. I thought this was absolutely fascinating. I'm definitely interested in crystals and stones myself, but I don't claim to know a huge amount about every single one. I'm not an expert by any means, but it's quite a compelling theory to consider. I mean, what if this is the reason why the entire estate is allegedly home to so many spirits, especially those of former employees or animals that have passed away on the land? Of course, like everything else I've mentioned in this episode, your own perspective on this will depend entirely on whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or somewhere in between. Which brings me neatly onto our conclusion, where I wanted to share a few of the thoughts and theories I've had whilst putting this installment of the podcast together. So as I mentioned, I have had paranormal experiences of my own, and more specifically, I've been one of a number of people who have seen the same spirit in the same place, just on totally different occasions and without us conferring with each other in any way whatsoever. So yes, I absolutely believe that guests and staff members at the Stanley have had genuine spirit encounters at the hotel. It's a place that has a lot of history from both before the hotel was built and afterwards too, so it doesn't surprise me at all. But, and I say this in the name of balance, because although I am a believer, I'm also a trained journalist, and it's in my nature to try and look at everything from every angle. I also think that there are probably many happenings at the hotel that are labelled as paranormal, but are possibly not as spooky as they may first appear. I've been to numerous places throughout my life that I have known are haunted before I got there, and because of that I have a bias towards looking for things to confirm that haunted status. I'm specifically talking about things like strange breezes, or unexplained indistinguishable noises, or even orbs. I'm not big on orbs myself, I think they're almost always nothing much at all, but each to their own on that one. My point is that if you're staying overnight in a famously haunted location, you're going to be listening out for every single bump in the night. But if you were at a regular hotel, you'd probably think nothing of the odd, random, unfamiliar noise, a creepy child's laugh when there are no other guests around, or an invisible dog scratching at the door. Fair enough, those are much harder to rationalise. But I think it's probably a good idea to take some of the stories about any ghostly building with a pinch of salt. Every time I do an episode like this, I receive comments and messages asking me whether I would visit it the location in question. And when it comes to the Stanley, it's a huge yes. It's now become a dream of mine to stay in the Stephen King room. It's officially on the bucket list. And I would absolutely reread The Shining before I went to really get me in the mood. It would be amazing to stay there around Halloween time, obviously, but I read that some of the most famous rooms get booked up well in advance. So I'd really have to plan ahead, which is not always my strong suit when it comes to travel. But one thing is for sure, if I ever got snowed in there, I'd be sure to sleep with one eye open. I can't describe how much I've enjoyed researching today's episode. It's taken me right back to being a teenager and first reading The Shining, as well as watching the film over and over again. My obsession with both is as strong as ever, and it's been fascinating to learn more about the place that provided Stephen King with so much inspiration. Would you ever consider staying at the Stanley Hotel? I can't tell you how many times I've almost accidentally called it the Overlook Hotel in this episode. I nearly did it again just then, but I would be very intrigued to find out your answer to this question. Feel free to leave me a note in the Q&A section if you're listening on Spotify to let me know. And as always, I'll be shouting out all of our social media pages at the end. But first, it's time for the beloved feature we like to call Weird Media. Okay, this might be one of the most niche and random weird media shoutouts in the history of the feature, but hear me out because this is something that has been truly occupying my life for the past couple of weeks. So I am a huge alternative music fan, I've mentioned this before, and I have always had a real soft spot for the band The Darkness. I was a big fan of their debut album, Permission to Land, and it's a record that until recently I hadn't played in full for years. I'd just dip in and listen to the odd song every now and again. But a few weeks ago, I had the urge to listen to it all the way through, and I had a mind-blown moment when listening to the very first track on the album a few rotations in. The song is called Black Shuck, and if you've ever heard it, you'll know what I mean when I say that it's very, very hard to decipher exactly what most of the lyrics are, because of the style that Justin Hawkins sings this song in. But after listening to it with fresh ears, I suddenly realised what the song was about, and I felt so silly afterwards for not picking up on it until now. It's about the East Anglian folklore tale of the mythical dog with glowing red eyes, known as Old Shuck or Black Shuck, and as soon as I looked it up, everything clicked and some of the lyrics sounded clearer to me, and honestly, it made me love the album more than ever. It is so wonderfully bizarre that for the very first song on their very first album, The Darkness decided to write about this tale from back in the 1500s, where legend has it that this dog crashed through the doors of a church, causing chaos, destruction, and even death. Since I had my lightbulb moment with it, I have listened to the song so many times. I always thought it was catchy, but now I love it on a whole new level. Do let me know whether I am literally the last person on earth to have figured this one out. I don't think I will be, but I would love to know whether this is old news to you, or something I've just introduced you to this very day. Okie dokie, time for some sore shoutouts. First up, Stephen King's own website was a great resource for those amazing insights into his visit to the Stanley. There were 2 Screen Rant articles, one by Kara Hadash, Stephen Barker and Zachary Moser, last updated in March 2024. Same goes for the second one, which was by Christopher Campbell and Tom Russell. There was an article from The Independent by Richard Waters from January 2017, and a brilliant Business Insider piece by Monica Humphrey from October 2021. Of course, there was the Ghost Hunters episode that was first shown on TV all the way back in May of 2006. The Undercover Colorado website had a great article about the hotel. That was from October 2023 by Patrick Maguire. Finally, we had a post from the blog travelworthtelling.net from September 2022, and the other was from the site I mentioned earlier, thediscoverer.com by Michael Nordine. As I say, I can't wait to hear which side of the debates you land on. Haunted or not haunted? Would you stay over or would you avoid it at all costs? I very much look forward to hearing your answers. To get in touch and share your thoughts, just look up at Things Get Weird podcast over on Instagram and Threads. On TikTok, we are at Things Are About to Get Weird, and similarly on Facebook, you can find us by searching for the podcast name. Our email address is thingsgetweirdpodcast@gmail.com, and if you've enjoyed this episode, a super quick rating or review wherever you're listening today would be incredible and so helpful for the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'll chat to you again next week in Weird Fix. So until next time, take care of yourself and others and keep it weird, but the good kind of weird.